distanced myself from the UFO community and my contemporaries, and I said to them, unless you can bring the people alternatives, unless you can bring them the truth, unless you can inject into all this harem, scarum, gloom, doom stuff a note of spirituality and hope, I'll have nothing to do with it. So I made my stand 4 years ago and distanced myself from them. I'm the only one, as far as I know, throughout the world who talks about the spiritual aspects of ufology. And indeed, the bottom line is that UFOs are spiritual in nature. They are not what we think in terms of hardware and extraterrestrials who are cloned, and some of them are, and the people from, let's say, the reticuli and so forth, the little gray men and all this. These things are true. But when you look at it from a higher point of consciousness and view, you will find out that indeed it is a spiritual experience. Each time you look at a UFO, you're looking at a part of you. How's that set with you? You're looking at a part of you. You're looking at a part of your consciousness which has always been there and is manifesting in a way that, number one, it gets your attention. Number two, it hits you deep within spiritually, and you have a realization that I was once there. Now, what's happening at this time, and don't get discouraged now, because I will get into the harem scarum later on, but I want to preface it all with the spiritual denotation so that you have a better understanding later on of what the whole thing is about. Some years ago, 1980, I was lecturing before 800 some odd people in Oakland Auditorium, Oakland, California. And we had 4 days. It was called UFO Symposium 1980. And I was one of the feature speakers. Wendell Stevens, Colonel Wendell Stevens, myself, were the two principal speakers. At the end of the conference, we had a question and answer period. And I'll never forget the little lady's name. Her name was Clarion. And she had such a clear, resonant, Tinkerbell type of voice. I mean, when she spoke, she was distinct from anybody else. She was real joy. And she was a little lady, and she dressed in a sort of a dowdy way and what have you, but you could never doubt that she was a special being. So she says, I have a question for Virgil. She called me Posty in those days. And she said, can you give us a succinct statement regarding UFOs as to their true reality? Well, as often happens to me when I'm up before a large crowd and lecturing and what have you, things come out of my mouth which I least expect. And they're out there, and I said, who said that? You know, what caused me to say that? So these profound things come through me, and sometimes I have to pretend that I'm doing it with great wisdom when I'm not at all. It's coming through me, you see. So at that moment, what came out of my mouth really surprised me. Without hesitation, I said to her, indeed I can. I can give you a succinct statement as to what UFOs are really about. And I said at that point in time, I said, it is a point in time of consciousness, yours and mine. I want you to take that home with you and think about it. It is a point in time of consciousness, yours and mine, and we could say theirs. It's always been there. It will always be there. It is nothing new. If you go back into biblical research, you will find no less than 12 noted prophets and speakers or beings in the Bible who had UFO experiences. They may have called it by a different name. In other words, chariots of fire, you know, wheels within wheels, and columns of fire and so forth. They had references to it, but the reference to that was in the framework of their thinking and state-of-the-art of the technology at that time. It wasn't too long ago, for instance, right here in this country, before we began to see these sleek spherical objects that we now call UFOs, that our forefathers, going back to your great-grandparents and beyond, were seeing sailing craft, the old master schooners, actually flying through the heavens, you see, going from one horizon to the other. And they viewed them, of course, as sailing craft as opposed to these sleek objects we see today. Now, there's a learning lesson in this that you see. And that is, as technology, of course, becomes greater, And as our awareness becomes greater and we are oriented towards technology, then of course the object that we're going to see of that same energy we're talking about is going to be technologically oriented towards our current thinking and state-of-the-art technology. So this is why we see UFOs in the form that we do today, you see. It's the same old energy, it's always been there, but we are viewing it, of course, in the perceptive, if you will, or perception of what we think is real. But it's the same energy. Now, like our energy, yours or mine or anybody in the room, there is so-called good or bad. And you notice I said so-called because there is no such thing as good or bad, there only is. It's the judgments that we have that make it what it is, you see. And so even when we deal with UFOs, we have to categorize them into the two categories of good or bad. And there is the third category where we could say indifferent, because there are those amongst us who, of course, are, and I'm talking extraterrestrially, who are indifferent or they are amoral. They have no feelings for you and I whatsoever. They look very much like we do, but they indeed would squash you like a bug if they had to, because the only thing they're concerned about is themselves and what it is that they need at this time. Which brings up another very important point, and that is, since the planet is in the process of graduating, and indeed we are, we're graduating this time around from the third dimension into the fourth and fifth. Now, this is unique because in the normal progression of things, you always move from one level of consciousness to the other progressively. This time, though, we as a planet, we as a peoples, and we as a consciousness are making a quantum leap into the future, and we're going simultaneously into the fourth and fifth dimension. Now, there's a reason for that, and it's basically could be referred to as catch-up, because we are a laggard planet. At least we have been in the past. But now we have turned out to be one of the most important planets in the whole scheme of God or the Creator's things. We have become unique because we have ended up being the toughest learning school there is in the whole universe. There's none other tougher than planet Earth. And if you come down here and do your job successfully, you are guaranteed when you go back over there of great things. The truth is that each and every one of you sitting here today is a God and you don't know it. Jesus told us 2,000 years ago, he warned us, and he told us in a very gentle way through an admonition which he rendered to the Pharisees. He said, "Know ye not that ye are gods?" Now the reason he said that is the Pharisees were hassling him about saying he and the Father were one. And he would say, "The Father and I are one." What he was telling them at that point was that he was God personified in body to come down here to experience that which he had created. There's a book back there called The 12 Women Apostles, and I spell that out in that book in a very gentle way so that it is not totally offensive to fundamentalist religion or what have you. But nonetheless, when you read the prophetic statements in there, you'll see indeed to what he was referring to, that he was God, the Creator, down here in a personified body to experience that which he, of course, had created. And the Pharisees were consistently taking him to task, and finally one day they said, "How dare you say that you and the Father are one?" And this is when he turned on them, finally in exasperation, and said, "For God's sake, go read your books, for in your books it says, 'Know ye not that ye are gods.'" So the truth is, if you were to be in my full array of my presentation, this is one of the things that I make very clear, is that each and every one of us are gods in amnesia. You know, there's a long, long story that goes with it, and I'll probably get into it later on, but we've been genetically altered, and we have been, shall we say, what's the proper word for it? Anyhow, we have been genetically altered and seduced, I guess is a good word for it, into believing that we are what we are when indeed we are not. Now, to go back to what I said about the graduation and jumping from one dimension to the other, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Believe it or not, within our solar system, there are 12 planets. not the customary 9 that the astrologers use and so forth. There are 3 additional planets above the 9 and above the moon and the sun. And of the 12, Earth is 1. All other planets, the 11 other planets, have reached a point of ascendancy wherein they are ready to move out of the 3rd dimension into the 4th dimension. And the one that is not quite ready yet, of course, is our little planet called planet Earth. So this is why we are experiencing all the things that we are at this point in time in terms of duress and stress and wars and fratricide and all the things, of course, which are predominant throughout the world today. We are going through a cleansing process in order to be able to ascend and join the sisterhood and the brotherhood of planets who await us. Our solar system cannot graduate from the 3rd into the 4th dimension until such time planet Earth, that little planet here, joins the sisters and brothers. And then at that point, of course, we are ready to move with the rest into the 4th and 5th dimension. Now, that's happening to you right now. Now, this is another reason why you have such frequency and intensity of UFO sightings today. This is another reason why you are so aware and keen and interested in that subject called ufology. But, however, unless it's looked at spiritually as I'm giving you today, in other words, the insight that I'm giving you today, it cannot be anything but frightening and derogatory in nature and cause you to become imbalanced. So this is why I always introduce more or less the overall picture first to give you some idea that these things are a part and parcel of you, that they've always been there, they always will be, and you are taking unto yourself what you perceive. Now, all of this, and I'd like to now branch into another aspect of this, which I think is quite interesting. I have many books which are long out of date. You might get them. Here's one called Secrets of UFOs. This was put out by Don Elkins back in the 70s, and they are some of the most profound writings that's ever been rendered on the subject of ufology. Don and others, of course, dealt with what we would call today abductees, only they refer to them as contactees. And there are many, many more contactees than there are abductees, you see. And these contactees are spiritual in nature. These are spiritual experiences vis-a-vis the horrendous things that we read about in Whitley Strieber's books and things of this nature. The one common characteristic throughout all of these books, and incidentally all of the dialogue in here and the examples of the people who were under hypnosis who related what they were experiencing at the time, each and every one of them always brought in the spirituality of their UFO experience. Without exception, each one said that they were previously introduced here on Earth from a UFO, an unidentified flying object, an extraterrestrial craft. Their memories, when they relate under hypnosis where they came from and how they got here, the likeness is startling. They come from a different planet. Their primary mode of transportation is, of course, in a spacecraft. And when they were introduced here into Earth, up to a degree, a certain level of consciousness, they were in a UFO to get here. They give full recall and recollection of actually parting from their, say, their comrades on that particular planet they're in, going into a spacecraft first, bidding adieu to their friends, knowing full well that the veil is going to be pulled, their consciousness will be cut off, that is the previous consciousness of their planet, and that they will be introduced into Earth in this very basic form we call humanness. From the point that they leave their point of origin to the time just before they're introduced into Earth, which would be, we would probably refer to as the astral plane, the upper astral, they are in that life-supporting ship and that life-supporting mode. It's at that point, alone and in conjunction with other things, that they go through the metamorphosis of getting ready to come in here into Earth, you see. There's a transformational process that takes place at that time in order to allow them to come into a human body and come into the third dimension. Many of them are just like, you know, it's like jumping from an airplane. Many people are scared to death. And many of them are too. They have reservations about it coming down here and experiencing it. And each and every one of you did too, probably. All of us, you know. Because we know beforehand what to expect before we get here. Now the grace is that when we finally reach this point of realization and we have lowered our vibrations enough, and that's exactly what it's all about, lowering our vibrations enough to come into the third dimension, at that time all previous memory is wiped out. And we forget who we were, our greatness, and all the other things, of course, that we were so accustomed to. Now, the other thing is that, and this is provocative, and I am going to give it to you, though. I give many spiritual counselings and readings, of course, in Europe. And one of my primary functions over there, after I do my lectures and workshops and on weekends, during the week I read for people. And in my readings, many times the question is asked, well, how do we get here? First of all, I relate to them that we do get here, believe it or not, by an extraterrestrial craft that's associated with our home planet. The other thing is that in that transformational process, and now I'd have to use the women per se in this explanation, there are some things which we don't commonly relate to or talk about. Let's talk about pregnancy. And believe it or not, it's tied in with ufology, pregnancy. What happens is you are on the inner planes, and let's just lump that into that statement, inner planes. And what you do, you're still in a state of consciousness, of awareness, should I say. You know who you are. You know what you must do. And so what you do, you look down on Earth, and you need a vehicle through which to be introduced here on Earth in order to be human, in order to do the job which you were destined to do down here. Okay, so after you've been counseled by the elders on the inner planes to receive approval, and that's a very important point right there. There isn't anybody here this time that is here by accident. Each and every one of you have been handpicked to be here at this time. I don't care who you are, whether it's Hitler or murderer or rapist or what have you. You indeed have been hand-selected and picked to play the role that you're playing right now. There are no mistakes this time around because, as I said, we're in the process of graduating from the third into the fourth and fifth dimension, making that quantum leap, if you will. Now, before you can come in this time, however, unlike before, because you could blip in and out anytime you wanted to, this time around you have had to receive approval from the elders. So what they do, they take a look at your past life track record, so to speak. In other words, your pluses and your minuses. And then they decide whether or not you are a worthy subject to be sent in here to do what has to be done for the planet and for yourself. Many of us are here because we have karma to attend to. And this is our last opportunity to set that karma right, you see. So all of this is discussed with you prior to coming in conjunction with the elders. At such time that you convince them that you are worthy to come in here, they say, all right, now your next step. Now at that point, incidentally, they assign you your inner plane's name. And your inner plane's name is always your first and middle name. That part is given to you if you have a middle name. That part is given to you on the inner planes. After you've got that, you basically have either 1/2 or 2/3 of the requirements which you need to complete the journey here on Earth. Then you're instructed to seek a set of parents who can fill out the rest, flesh out the rest of what you need for your journey here on Earth, to follow the roadmap which you will create. At that point, you look down on Earth and you say, yeah, no, I don't know if they'll do or not, yeah. And pretty soon you hit upon a set of parents that fill the requisites and the prerequisites of what you need to complete that name. Now, let's take someone like me. I lecture under the name of Virgil Armstrong, and I'm known all over the world as Virgil Armstrong. But I have a very British name, and believe it or not, it's a toughie. and it's Postlethwaite. Who would hang a handle on anybody like that unless it was necessary? That's my last name. Along with Virgil Armstrong Postlethwaite. I chose the Postlethwaite family because they were most suitable for what I had to do here on Earth. And as it turns out, numerologically, with the name Postlethwaite, Virgil Armstrong, I had a complete chart. In other words, I had no karma. But don't let that kid you. That makes it tougher to be here than if you had karma in reality. So now, what I did to follow this through, so you better understand what I was saying. You're still in the spacecraft mode. You're still in the spacecraft or extraterrestrial consciousness is what I'm saying. And now we're at a point where I have to choose my parents, and I did choose the Postlethwaites. Now, at that time, I had to convince them to have me. So what I did, while I was still in the etheric body, I went to them and I whispered in my mother's ear telepathically, "You need a baby." You know, and that's exactly what we do. We get down and we're still in that etheric electromagnetic body rather than the physical body, and we whisper in mommy's ear, "You need a baby." So mommy thinks about it for a while, and the next thing you know, she talks to her husband, and of course there's an agreement, a contract made between the two, and there is the initial beginning of you. Of course, it happens in other ways, rambunctiously. It could be rape, or it could be the spur of the moment, or whatever, but nonetheless, at all times, it's by design. There are no accidents, you see. But the normal way, the way I'm about to give you, is the way that most of us get in here. So we convince mommy to convince father to have the baby, and what happens? Father plants seed in mother, and it's microscopic in size. You can't even see it with the naked eye. But then it begins to grow, and when it does, it gets larger, 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 and finally, somewhere around the 4th month of pregnancy, we have, of course, a remarkable thing happening. So we have the 4th, 5th, and we have the normal 9 months of pregnancy, in other words, full-term pregnancy. But what the medical people are not telling you is that we're not in the womb until somewhere around the 4th month. What's in there up to that point in a developmental state is a little body that has basically an animal intelligence. It has no real consciousness, what have you. It's in a developmental stage. Now, during these 4 months, we are still in the etheric, we're still on the inner planes, and concurrently with development within the mother's womb, we're out there doing other things, you see. Becomes the 4th month, it's time to lock in, and this is the point that we lose all consciousness of where we came from and who we are. Because at that point, we leave the ship, we go into the body of our mother, and now we are there for full-term pregnancy. That was for an additional 5 months. Now, just as an aside, and I'll end this real quickly, during these 5 months that we're actually in the womb, this is when we program our mothers and our fathers to call us by the name that we have today. Because that name is essential in order to complete your journey here on Earth. When you're in, what is your name, dear, your first name? Doris. Right. While Doris was in her mother's womb, she says to her father and she says to her mother telepathically, particularly to her mother while she's in the womb, "When I am born, you will call me Doris." It isn't, "Oh, Mommy, would you please call me Doris?" No, no. You will call me Doris, you see. So she gets that. She's bombarded by it for 5 months. The other thing is that when mother and father are sleeping together, you go and you touch his aura, you get into his consciousness, and you tell him the same thing. "Look, Buster, when I'm born, you're going to call me Doris." So they are pre-programmed for this right up to the point that you, of course, come out of the womb, and you're Christian by what you call your Christian name or your baptismal name, you see, or may happen to be. All of this, again, is coming from a spiritual point of view and is of an extraterrestrial nature. So it's just a little aside I'd like to throw in there to clear up some other things that may be of interest to you here on Earth. Number one, as I said, there are no accidents here on Earth. Everything is by design. Everything is by decree. The rapist, the murderer, and everybody else is a prime ingredient of the cosmic pie, so to speak. I got in trouble in Germany before an audience of 1,500 and some odd. I was lecturing, and I said that Hitler was a divine instrument. My God, you could hear the audible gasp. 1,500 people simultaneously gasping is really notable. And so I just stood up there and let it sink in, and then all of a sudden I could, over here to my left was a little man, an older man, I guess he was in his 60s, and he stood up and he said, "Jawohl!" And he gave a salute, Hitler salute. And every head, mostly women in there, swung towards him, and the poor guy was skunked. He had to get out of there, and he left. I never saw him again. After that, I explained to them that Hitler was the last of the lords of darkness. Because when I teach the Mayan prophecy and the Mayan calendar, there were 9 lords of darkness. And the last lord of darkness began in 1935, and he ended in 1987. And the one who played that role was none other than one we knew as Hitler. And I'll be talking about his involvement with the extraterrestrials later on, because he had a deep involvement with the same ones we're working with right now. All of that prior to, of course, our involvement with the Greys. He was the first one to work with the Greys on an aware level, so to speak. Okay. So Hitler then was the last lord of darkness, and incidentally, he didn't die in the bunker. He was taken to Argentina. Again, I'll talk about it later on. He lived out a full life down there. He died in his 90s. Now, I didn't know this until I had finished that very same lecture in Frankfurt, Germany. I had another lecture in Chicago, back to back with it. So as soon as I finished that lecture, I had to hop on a plane, fly to Chicago, and give my presentation there. And in my audience was a little lady who was so excited when I was giving information about Hitler and the Greys and so forth. So after the whole thing was over with, she came up to me and says, "Virgil, I must talk to you. I have very important information for you, which substantiates what you've already said." And I said, well, now I was booked solid in readings all that week. And I said, unless I have a cancellation, say in the evening around dinner time, I won't be able to talk to you until the whole thing is over. But if I have a cancellation, I indeed will call you, and we can have dinner together, and then you can convey to me what it is you want me to know. Well, sure enough, into I think about the 4th day of my readings, I had a cancellation, and I called her. And her background and origin was Argentinian. And she said to me, "I am the daughter of the former Secret Service head of all of Argentina." And her name is, how do you pronounce it? Rubio Monteiro. And she said when she was about somewhere between 12 and 13, she and her father were sitting in an outdoor cafe in Argentina, Buenos Aires. And he said to her, he said, "See that man sitting over there?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "Well, he's a very famous man." And she said, "Well, who is he, Daddy?" "Well, his name was Hitler." "And you see the woman sitting next to him?" "Yes." "Well, that's his wife, Eva Braun." And so now, this is long after the war is over, you see. And this is back in I guess the 70s, really. Late 60s, early 70s. And it was at least that. So anyhow, the point is that Hitler did not die. He played his role as the last Lord of Darkness. He then, of course, was surreptitiously taken by submarine, and there's much more to the story than this, surreptitiously taken by submarine into Argentina, and there he lived out his life in full. And Eva Braun, the last I heard, she was in her 80s, and I heard just recently she has also died. He died in his 90s. So he fulfilled the prophecy of the Mayan calendar and the Mayan prophecy. Now there again, I use that illustratively to point out to you that there isn't anybody here that's not here for a specific reason or some type of design. There's only one exception to that, extraterrestrially, and that is because we are in the process of graduating from the 3rd into the 4th and 5th, And these are the most trying, testing times we will ever experience. They have turned loose upon us the lower astral. And all you have to do today is look around the world, and you can see this representatively in other countries. For instance, what's happening in Yugoslavia right now. Look what brother is doing to brother. I mean, it's sheer insanity. Look in, say, your own country right here, and look within your own city, Phoenix, Arizona, or any of the larger cities, and look at the things that happen that are amoral in nature. In other words, people indiscriminately killing children and adults and what have you, and there's no basic reason for it other than they just kill, you know. There's not even hate many times involved. It's an indiscriminate type of thing that takes place that, in a sense, is a mark of insanity. Yes, question?
I have a question. You mentioned the planets.
Mm-hmm.
How does astrology fit into that? Is like the planet we last came from? You know, I don't know how.
Well, what I say in terms of, in answer to your question, I say that astrology basically is playing with a half a deck, you know, because there are 3 other major planets that they're not considering, you see. And so we do not have a in-depth and true interpretation of who we really are.
So not all of us may come from the same planet.
Oh, no,
Before
no,
we enter
no.
here on the ship or
Yeah.
however we decided.
Right.
And the vibration of the planet also determines.
Well, the vibration of the original planet, of course, is lost when you come in here. You may have memories of it and recall, particularly in your meditation, particularly sometimes in your periods of reflection. You may say to yourself, as I think most of the people have done at one time or another, I don't belong here. I don't feel like I belong here. I know I'm here to do something, but that's not really where I truly belong. I belong out there someplace. Even many times when we look at the heavens, we have an awareness, you know, that we belong elsewhere, or we came from some other place. Now, the Indians are much more open to this than we are. For instance, if you go up here to the Hopis and talk to the Hopi Indians, and if you ask them, you're on the inner circle, and say, where do you truly come from? They might give you an answer like, we come from the inner earth, or we might do this or that. But if they feel that you're worthy of it, they will point to the Pleiades and say, we come from there, the 7 sisters, you see. So they come from the Pleiades. If you go to the Dogons in Africa, the blue-black race, and you ask them where they come from, they will say, we come from there. Serious. And so every tribe, for instance, the Aborigines in Australia, are very advanced spiritual peoples. You know, they're like our Indians. They're regarded as savages. They're regarded as, in many cases, barbarians and drunks and all this. They're not. As you will hear tomorrow when I talk about the Indians and the Aboriginal peoples, they're you might say, the arcane, they keep the arcane secrets in hiding. They are the spiritual leaders of the future. And they are the eldest of brothers. They have a greater understanding who we really are and where we come from than we do, you see. Yet we treat them, as I say, like barbarians. There's another very important distinction, which you will hear tomorrow when I lecture on the Indians. There's such a thing as the Indians in the making and the true Indians. And there is a diversity here, you see. And what you're seeing on the reservation, for the most part, are the Indians in the making. The drugs, the alcohol, the prostitution, the black magic, and all these things, these are Indians who have previously been white people or some other race who has abused the Indians, the conquistadors, the cavalrymen, and people like this. And they basically and inordinately mistreated the Indian. They've come back this time in their last lifetime to pay the karma for what they did to those people. And now they're in red bodies or Indian bodies. And of course, as one of my Indian friends said to me, they ain't doing so well, are they? But with another thing too, within every tribe that I've ever visited, whether it be here in the Americas or Mexico or Central America, wherever I go, I find that in the inner core, there's a very pristine and pure group. And this is the group you must always reach if you are to work with them. You can't find them. They'll reach out and get you if they think you're worthy of it, and they'll bring you into the inner circle, and there's where you learn the truth about the things that I'm telling you right now, and you will hear tomorrow about the Indians. It's mind-boggling. Okay. So let me sum this introductory part up simply with this. All UFO experiences are spiritual in nature. Please bear that in mind, because it is. It's an experiencing of your individualistic and your collective consciousness. It's always been there, it always will be. I'd like to use an illustration biblically oriented to give you some idea of what I'm talking about. We all know of the great exodus that took place in Egypt with Moses and Aaron and, of course, all the people who followed them. We know that they spent 40 years in the desert, roaming, it seemed almost indiscriminately. But they also had some great experiences. Some of them, of course, are legendary, and they are recorded in the Bible or other books associated, such as the Lost Scrolls of the Dead Seas. These are chronicles that speak in truth rather than the hidden way that the Bible speaks. For instance, we know the epic story about Moses and the Red Sea. Do you think for a moment that he raised a staff and said, "God, please part that sea for me"? He didn't. There was UFO that was with them all the time. They were in that desert, hovering over them, supplying their needs. And when he was being pursued by the Pharaoh's men, he took what is known as a vril rod, V-R-I-L, vril, it's a power rod, which was directly in concert with the ship that was hovering above him. And he was told to point the vril rod at the sea, and they would do the rest. And indeed they did. History speaks for itself. He parted the seas, seemingly. He and his people, of course, made it across, and then, of course, as soon as they got across, the power was cut off, the seas closed in, and there went the Pharaoh's men. There's another story about him. He was out of water, and again, he took the vril rod, and he was told to go over to a certain rock and tap it 3 times, and he'd have water. Well, he did, and a gush and a fountain came up, and they had inordinate amounts of water, to suit all their needs, to carry them for the rest of their journey. We talk about, example, you ever hear of manna? Manna from heaven? Okay, what do you think that was? That was created during the time of Moses. That came from the ship. The Jews at that time were sick and tired of their rice and bean diet, and they were always complaining, and so Moses went to the mentor, the ship, whether it be Jehovah or whoever it was, I don't know. And he said, "Look, my people are restless. They need a change in diet and so forth. Can you do something for me?" And they said to him, "Have your women at the break of dawn tomorrow, while the dew is still in the bushes, go out, and the food that you're looking for will be there." Well, that was the manna. The manna was festooned on the bushes. It hung down like, you can liken it to cotton candy. When you go to a carnival, you ever eat cotton candy? That was the consistency of it. And it had all the vitamins, and it had a luscious taste and everything else, and they were real happy. And the women would go out while the dew was still on the plants and so forth, and collect it in their baskets and take it back, and that was their regiment and diet, of course, for the day. All of these things, of course, are related extraterrestrially. If you think for a moment that the one known as Jonah went in the belly of a whale, a stinking whale, for 3 days, and then came out whole and live, that's a bunch of hooey. He went into the belly of an aquatic UFO, and received the instructions that he was supposed to have, and then came back and became a great prophet. So there's many, many references in the Bible, of course, to, again, the spiritual experiences of ufology. So I just want to throw that out today to get you to thinking about the spiritual aspects. The other thing is, many people, and I came down on several people years and years ago. I've been in this business so long. There was a woman who wrote a book that said simply that when the time comes that each and every one of us will be lifted off by the spacecraft from the planet and be spared the adversities of the coming Earth changes. And incidentally, I'm getting ready to cut a tape on the coming Earth changes, what you can expect physically and spiritually in the relative near future. We've only got 7 years between the year now and the year 2000 when all of this will have to be said and done. So I think it's wise that people know what they can expect, what their alternatives are, and what will take place in terms basically of the physical and the planet itself. Now tomorrow in my Indian presentation I will be talking about that in a degree, because I'll be talking about the Mayan prophecy, I'll be talking about the Hopi prophecy, and then I will be talking about the ultimate Indian prophecy. And it's in these sequences that we get some awareness and some idea of what's going to happen to us in the very near future. You know, we're coming down the finish line right now. We're running for all we're worth. We're headed for the tape, you know, to finish the race. But before we get there, we still got some very important things to do. And to many of us, they will be pleasant. To others, they're going to be horrendous. Depends upon where you are with your state of consciousness. If you're capable at this time of accommodating incoming spirit or the Christ consciousness, you will be spared the majority, if not all, of the adversities that others will experience. There is no safe place in the physical. If that's where your mind is, you're doomed to experience the very things that you are fearing. Fear is one of the greatest elements of control that the bad extraterrestrials have over us. As long as you fear, you give your power away. If you can be one with the source or God, the creator, or one with the Christ, you will be spared these adversities. Even if you were to be harmed momentarily, for the moment, you would not feel great pain and what have you. You'd be taken out of body into your rightful place and in concert with the Christ. So if you can remember all that, then of course that's the survival that you're looking for in terms of the coming earth changes. Earth changes are a certainty. And I think the most apropos statement that Jesus ever made in terms of something like this, he said in answer to a question, when can we expect you to come? He said, I shall come like a thief in the night. Which means literally that he will come when we least expect it. Now the truth is, he's already here. And of course, it is in the form of consciousness. You know, we're not going to have, the only ones that are going to see the Christ in the second coming are those who are on a like vibration and like consciousness. For those who are not, they're not going to see him. But those of you who can raise your consciousness high enough to accommodate the Christ consciousness, you indeed will see the second coming of the Christ. So what Tuella said about everybody being lifted off the planet, you know, in the time of great disaster is not true. The space vehicle that will take you off of this planet as the extraterrestrial that you truly are, and incidentally, planet Earth is a spacecraft, you know. It's hurtling through space just like any other spacecraft could or would, and you are part and parcel of it. But the vehicle to get you off of this planet into your respective places from which you came, your point of origin and so forth, into the fourth and fifth dimension, believe it or not, is that body you sit in right here. There's a transformational process that's taking place and has been for many years now, in the body, in the consciousness, in the soul, and in the mind. Each and every one of us, if we are doing our job right, we are going through a transformational process wherein we are becoming light. We are donning our light bodies, as opposed to what we normally had before, which was a body of corporeality. The Bible, even the Bible states it almost unequivocally. It says, dust to dust, earth to earth. That's the old archaic thinking. That's all changed now. You've changed it. You've changed it through your actions and your interactions. You have changed it through your consciousness. And now what we're doing, you as an individual and me, we're lifting ourselves into the light, because the light is the escape mechanism that we will use to get off of this planet. In the past, there have been several things they have used, several vehicles. Again, we're talking about the extraterrestrials. They have used several vehicles to raise the consciousness, not only of the planet, but also of you and I. And again, this is an aside. I won't go into it in depth. It is part of another lecture that I give. But the instruments which they have used in the past are, of course, pyramids, crystals, vortexes, and you and I. Now, I'm not an artist, but crystals, better put a cap on that, I guess. Crystals, pyramids, vortexes. The ultimate, of course, is you and I. There are 12 of these. There's 12 of these, and there's unlimited amounts of vortexes. Throughout the earth as we know it, and I'll be writing this in my next book. I've been commissioned in Germany to write my second book, in addition to the one I have back there. That's the Armstrong Report number 2. They've asked me to write Armstrong Report number 1, I beg your pardon. And now I've been commissioned to write Armstrong Report number 2. I'm going to be talking about these things in the Armstrong Report number 2. Around the planet, you're following the equatorial belt, such as you see here. This is our planet. You've got juxtapositioned all around the planet. You have crystals, and you have, of course, pyramids. All of these are strategically located in the proximity, either south or north, of the equatorial belt, as you see it here. And these are instruments, these two right here, basically, are primary instruments of control to influence you and I to respond to a given incoming vibration or consciousness. Now, the one thing that the guardian forces, and for the most part I'm talking about the guardian forces, the one thing they will not do, vis-a-vis, say, the not-so-good ETs, is to interfere with free will of mine. They will not. That is sacred, even to them, and they know that it's sacred to us. So therefore, they will not interfere with our free will, but they will interact with us subliminally by using these divine instruments, the pyramids and the crystals, the vortexes, to cause you and I to respond in a given way. Let's say that what they wish to do is to raise the consciousness of the planet. Well, the planet resonates at 7.83 roughly hertz. So what they would like then is for each and every one of us to respond to that 7.83 hertz, you see, so that we become, how shall we say, in harmony, you know, and we are sympathetic to the incoming vibrations. So that's a subliminal influence that they impose upon us. Now, to cause all this to come to pass, they use the crystals and, of course, the pyramids around the equatorial belt by beaming energy into these edifices, such as the pyramid and the crystal, to get them to vibrate to a given harmonic or frequency. Many years ago, while working with the Pueblo Indians in Taos, New Mexico, looking for my teacher, and I finally found him. He was an Indian with the Pueblo Club, the name of, tribe, I should say, called Sunhawk. And my Indian training, of course, came through him, and he's now dead. But during that time, too, I was very much into the study, particularly the spiritual aspects of UFOs, when this information was given to me. Had to do with the many sonic booms that were taking place back in those days. How many people remember the sonic booms back? Okay. They said it was the new Concorde, the new French aircraft. They said it was the military developing new craft and what have you. I didn't believe it. So I went to the brothers, the Space Brothers, and my ship particularly, and I said, look, are they doing it or is it you? And they said, we're doing it. And I said, well, what the hell are you doing? They said, well, we're adjusting the planet, you know. With the coming Earth changes and the things which are going to be taking place in the near future, there has to be some adjustments. So we're taking some things in and we're taking other things out. And this activity, of course, is causing these sonic booms. Well, I'm from Missouri. So, you know, and I'm a very pragmatic man, really. Being ex-military and everything that I am, I have a very pragmatic side. But I also have a side which I feel is basically creditable, that I can delve into other areas of understanding. So my first question to them was, well, okay, maybe that's so. How about showing me what you're doing? The next thing you know, and I was in meditation at that point, I was taken out of body, and I ended up, believe it or not, under the Bermuda Triangle. And when I got down there, here I am standing here before a huge crystal called the Mother Crystal, which was surrounded by 12 smaller crystals of different shapes and sizes, hexagonal, diamond, all geometric formations, along with the Mother Crystal, which was immense. There's not enough people in this room to get their arms around the circumference of this circle, this crystal. It was so big. And another thing I noted while I was looking at that, before I asked him what it was all for, I looked down here to my far left, and way down there were about 20 UFOs parked like they were in a parking lot, you know. And immediately in front of them was this huge tunnel that looked like a railroad tunnel. And this was of great interest to me. But anyhow, got my attention back to the crystal, and I said, well, what is this? What's it mean? And then the thought occurred to me, is this the one that sank Atlantis? And they said, yes, that's the one that sank Atlantis. And I said, all right. I said, what does it do? Well, then they began to explain to me the theory that I'm just now giving you, that there are 12 major crystals and there are 12 major pyramids around the, in a circumference around the equatorial belt. And then they told me how they begin to use these crystals and pyramids and vortexes to stimulate the consciousness of the planet collectively and individualistically. Now, for instance, let's say that this is the crystal itself. I'll use it simultaneously. The ship's up here. And what they do, they beam energy into the crystal itself. And the crystal then takes this energy and it begins to vibrate at a given frequency or harmonic. Now, that's controlled, of course, from the ship in the form of a laser penetration. And as it begins to vibrate, of course, it sings and it reaches a certain state of resonance. And, of course, what they do then is to farm that out into the other crystals, of course, that surround it. And it's like playing an organ or a piano, you know. They can vary this through the mother crystal itself. They can feed it out into the subcrystals, 12 in nature, and they can have, you know. What's it remind you of? Remember the movie? Yeah. Hey, those guys knew what they were doing when they did it. You know, they were telling us something. And this was the same principle that they described to me as a methodology of influencing you and I and the planet and the world to respond to a given frequency or harmonic. But we have to respond to it. They will not make us do it because they will not interfere with our free will. Incidentally, for your edification, I have plotted all these. I have them now plotted around the equatorial belt. And as I say in my next book, I will reveal where they are. Of interest, 5 of them, 5 of these major pyramids, would you believe it or not, is in the holdings of the United States. Hawaii, beginning with Hawaii. There's one in Maui. There's one off of the coast of Vancouver, which is a contingent part of the USA, and it's under the water. The next one is in the Four Corners area, right where we're living. There's a major pyramid up there. Some years ago, it almost came up. I was in on that. And then the next one you will find in the, that's 3. The 4th one is to be found in the, what they call the triangular area of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. You know where that is? That's the old Algonquin area. And that's where all the serpentine mounds are and what have you. And many, many inexplicable things. They're still scratching their head trying to figure out, you know, what they are. And lo and behold, here very recently, just while I was in Europe, they discovered a major pyramid there. They were excavating with bulldozers and they ran into this silly thing and it's under the ground. And the estimate is that it's something like 1,200 feet deep, something like that is a report I heard. So there's the 5th one. And is that the 4th? Let's see. 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th. The 5th one is to be found off of the coast of Maine, and it's underwater. So there are your 5 of the 7 pyramids, and the rest of them, of course, I have plotted through Europe. And there's some major things in Australia and also New Zealand, particularly when it comes to the crystals. They're there. And for your edification, too, Australia and New Zealand are parts of old Lemuria. You know, it goes way back to a place called Rutos. Before it was Lemuria, it was Rutos. And then later on, of course, became what we know today as Lemuria. The West Coast also, back as far inland as where we are right now, is also part of old Lemuria in its original state. So most of us here, for the most part, who live here, I guess we could say we're old Lemurians, you know. Now, some of us, of course, have had dual lives, both in Atlantis and Lemuria. But going back to this, I didn't tell you about the vortexes. Usually the vortexes are 3 mountains. If you take 3 major mountains and you triangulate them like this and you go to the very epicenter of that, you will have a major vortex. And This is why you will always find great UFO activity around a mountainous area. For instance, you go up to Mount Shasta. You've got Mount Shasta, you've got Mount Washington, McKinley's in there, Mount St. Helens and what have you. You can triangulate any of those, and you're going to end up with a vortexual area such as this, which is energy which is used by the extraterrestrials to do things, the same things they do with the pyramids and the crystals here upon the earth. Incidentally, I use the same principle when I put on sky demonstrations. In other words, I call in the UFOs. And I use that same vortexual energy to first send a beam of love up to contact them, and then they respond to the beam of love, and then they show themselves to us in the form of flyovers or sometimes even landings on the ground. We've had those. I've been doing that for now 23 or 24 years. Okay, now the lead up to the final element. We've gone through all of this. We've gone through the pyramid stage. We've gone through the crystal stage, all of it extraterrestrial in nature. We're still going through some of this, particularly the vortexual stage. But in the process of doing all this, in the process of using the crystals and the pyramids, they have been transforming you and I into a higher state of consciousness and frequency. So that metamorphously, you might say, they have changed the structure, the molecular structure, if you will, and also the atomical structure of your body from one of corporeality, dust to dust, and earth to earth, to one of light. This is why we have such a tremendous, or have had, and it's now beginning to wane because it's time. This explains why we have had such a morbid fascination with crystals, you see. Because we recognize that crystals are an instrument of transformation. And there's a subliminal understanding that our bodies must become crystal-like or crystalline-like in order to facilitate incoming consciousness. Even though we're still in the flesh, that flesh, of course, is becoming crystalline in nature. You become the receptor. You become the transmitter, the transponder, and all these things, of course, are which are instruments of communications. This is what our body is going through right now. And so to return to something that I said earlier, you are the ultimate space vehicle, and that's the thing that's going to take you off of this planet. Your point in time of consciousness and your respondent body to the incoming consciousness. You notice above the head here I put the striations, which of course represents the nimbus, such as Jesus wore, that you will wear when you reach that final stage, somewhere between now and the year 2000. That's not much. But believe me, hang on, because it's going to be joyful and tough at the same time. So you're in for a lot of either rude awakenings, or you're going to have one peppery ride, you know, and it'll be a great joy as opposed to whatever. The last thing I wish to say along that line is that the body is a vehicle. It's nothing more. It's good to have a nice body. I like a nice body. I respect other people with nice bodies. I like to look at both men and women and their bodies and their configurations and so forth. To me, it's pleasing to feel and to see somebody else's body that is in a balanced state. There's something very, important about it. And these balanced states that we're reaching right now will be the vehicles that we will, of course, use to transition. But the point is, we'll do one or two things. We'll drop the body, or we will take the body as it is in a transformational state, and we'll step from one dimension into the other and just continue where we have been headed all the while. Now let me point out to you also this, that there is little difference between the fourth dimension and the third dimension. The basic difference is the embodiment. Here you're in a physical body. It's an encumbrance as opposed to something which is facilitating. Over there, you're in your light body or your auric body or your electromagnetic body. And again, that is extraterrestrial in nature. Any questions so far on anything I've covered? Yes, sir.
How do you discern the difference between either dropping the body or transforming?
Well, in dropping the body, of course, it would probably be through an accident or death or something of that nature, an accidental death, okay? And some people will choose to go that way. And it will be so quick, though, that there'll be no pain, there'll be no even any expectations. It'll be done summarily, and you'll be removed from one vibration, the third dimension, into the fourth, and the body will be no more. At that point, you step into your real body, which of course is your etheric electromagnetic body.
The other process where you take this transformed body here with you to the other dimension.
Right, that's the process that we have been going through to reach this state here, you see, so that now we're in a light body as opposed to the body of corporeality, which we have been in for so long. There's a great deal more to it, but I can't go into depth today. But that's basically an overlighting of the principles. But that's the ultimate aim, to transform this body into a vehicle which can rise from the planet, hopefully, in toto. But if not, of course, if we are in the right frame of mind and reference and cosmic awareness and what have you, we'll be taken out into our other body and we'll just drop this one and shed it. Not everybody will take the physical body with them. Yes?
The vortexes here, are they true vortexes?
Well, they're minor vortexes. They're not of the intensity nor the magnitude of the ones that I explained right here. All vortexes are an attraction for both for polarities, for the good and the bad, so to speak. The vortexes that we have here have changed so over the years. They're polluted right now. And although they are a tourist attraction, they're not the old vortexes that I first knew when I came up here in the 70s and began to scout this whole area. The original energy, incidentally, of old Sedona, which was related to the vortexes, you'll find now in Cottonwood. And as you go across the bridge, there's a little subdivision there called Bridgeport. That old energy is right there on that farm to the right. It looks like a horse farm, and that's where you find it today. I don't know if they'll ever move it back here or not. I think they will, once we get over this craziness of tourism and all the other things that we're experiencing right now. And we do have some very, very heavy energies in here right now, too. We were talking about that earlier, and Melody asked me if I was going to mention it. I will mention it in passing only. And I would say to you that the information that I give you right now is to be used with discretion and is to be used judiciously, because it could be potentially dangerous to you or even those who are involved in it. We're talking about Boynton Canyon, we're talking about Long Canyon, Secret Canyon, and some of these other places out there. There are some very spooky things going on out there right now, and my advice to you is to stay out of it rather than get involved in it. Here recently there have been several mishaps back there where people have disappeared. There's also been 3 women found with their hearts cut out and things of this nature, and that's a clear warning to stay out of there, you see. I don't want to go into the depth or immensity of it. I will merely say that if you're aware with Groom 51, the Dulce incident and things like this, it's along those lines. And these are not uncommon things today, and I will be talking about it later, because we are, when I say we, I'm talking about the United States government, as well as other world powers, are involved and are in bed with the not so good, the ones I call the malefic ETs. And I don't think, and I have to believe, and I said that in my book, that our government, I don't think they're doing that by choice, but I don't think at the time that it occurred, back in the 50s, that they had any choice. And as a result of that, well, let me discuss it later. I'll go more in depth with it so you can have some realization or understanding of what I'm saying about the Sedona area. In answer to your question, there's a lot of crazy things going on here right now. Even the general consciousness, if you will, of Sedona right now is being affected due to these aberrant activities that are out there in that particular